Welcome to Unlocking High Performance, a podcast for leaders who believe great results should never come at the expense of their people. I'm Jason Lauritsen. I'm an advisor to CEOs and leadership teams who want to accelerate performance in their organization without burning people out. Today, we're going to do something a little different in this episode. I'm going to tell you about my business. And specifically, I'm going to tell you about a significant evolution in my business, why I'm making the changes I'm making, and what our work with clients looks like. Now, over the years, I've had so many interactions and experiences with people who have been following my thought leadership work for years. Maybe they've been following my blogs or my speaking or my webinars, but they weren't really sure what we do for clients. Or they'll say, I love your work, but I don't really know what you do when you work with clients. And so this is an effort to fix that. Now, even if you aren't in a position to necessarily hire us to support your organization or even recommend us in your organization, I'd love you to know enough about our work and what we do and the problems we solve so that you could refer us when the opportunity arises. Maybe you hear someone from another organization talking about the challenges we can solve. So that's my goal today. Now, if you aren't interested in learning more about what we do and why, then feel free to bail out now, right? Pull the plug. I'll see you next week. No hard feelings. But if you're going to stick around, let me fill you in on what this is all about. So recently, I launched a new brand for my business. It's called Connected Performance Group. And this represents kind of some rethinking that I've been doing about my work and how we work to support organizations over the last couple of years. Let me explain kind of what's happened. So for the past, I'd say 25 years or so of my career, I have watched way too many organizations who invested pretty heavily or pretty significantly in improving employee engagement or employee performance in the organization without ever really seeing the return that they were hoping for. I'm talking about things like, robust management training programs or, employee engagement surveys that are done every year or performance review processes, right? All of these things were done with good intentions by leadership groups that were really trying to do their best to improve the organization. But what they all share in common is that they failed to deliver the kind of performance improvements that they promised or that were hoped for. Why? It's because the way that they were executed were addressing the symptoms instead of the underlying system that actually drives performance within the organization. Now, I'm not hating on any of these things that I just mentioned, right? We do some of these things, right? Employee surveys are valuable. I love a good employee survey, but when leaders fail to recognize that addressing the feedback from that survey starts with them and they don't take action, they can do more harm than good. In management training can be incredibly powerful, right? We do a fair amount of management training. We've seen the impact, but when leaders fail to model and reinforce what's being trained to managers, the wheels can fall off almost immediately. That means the investment is wasted, right? Tens of thousands of dollars or more kind of up in smoke. And don't get me started on performance reviews or the performance review process, right? Asking managers to provide feedback once or twice a year is just not how humans develop and grow and perform, right? The process reinforces the wrong behaviors. So this cycle needs to end, and this is the work that we do at Connected Performance Group. Our goal is to help our clients diagnose and fix the system issue so that performance becomes inevitable within their organization rather than accidental. And the work that we do is built on what we call the Connected Performance System, which I developed from kind of 20 years of helping organizations improve performance and then studying what actually drives it. And this system focuses on three conditions that every high-performing organization requires. The first is leadership clarity, because when leaders aren't clear and aligned on priorities and purpose, confusion ripples through the organization. So we help leadership teams establish the clarity that accelerates everything downstream. The second piece is organizational alignment. Strategy and culture drift apart more often than leaders realize. And we often, if you're not at that leadership table, you can feel it when it happens. When they start to disconnect, execution starts to fall apart, friction shows up everywhere. We've all lived through this. So what we do is help organizations uncover and fix those disconnects between culture and strategy. And then the last piece is performance enablement. Because even when strategy and culture are clear and aligned, a manager who lacks the right skills and the systems to support their people can unintentionally undermine it all. So we equip leaders at every level of the organization with practical relationship-first management practices that bring out the best in their people. So that's the connected performance system: leadership clarity, organizational alignment, and performance enablement. Now let me talk a little bit about what each of these actually look like. So when we are working with an organization, the place we typically start is with leadership clarity. And here's why. It's because most performance problems start at the top of the organization. And I know that might feel a little harsh or a little critical, but it's not bad news, because what it means is that as a leadership team, you have leverage. Because when leadership gets clear and aligned, performance accelerates quickly, right? Clarity is the rocket fuel of performance. The problem is that leadership teams are almost never as clear as they think they are. And their blind spots show up as, mixed messages, or, slowed down or difficult decisions, or avoided tough or hard calls. And then downstream, those blind spots turn into, uncertainty and disengagement, which erodes trust and really just slows everything down. So we work with the leadership team directly to uncover where clarity is assumed but not shared, and where alignment is stated but not practiced. Because once the leadership team can see things clearly, then they can start to move forward boldly. And so from there, we help them create a plan that addresses the gaps that we uncover and help them create greater clarity where it's needed. And this typically involves some kind of a leadership offsite or retreat that's followed then by some ongoing advisory and accountability support, kind of keep the team on track. Because we all know how easy it is to lose, focus. Clarity is momentary. It's an ongoing practice if you want to maintain it. So an example, or a couple quick examples. We had one client that came to us that was frustrated by constant sort of conflict and friction between teams, between departments. And this was undermining their ability to get things done in the way that they needed to get things done. And they thought they had a culture problem. It's what they thought was going on. But what we found when we got into the work, when we did the leadership clarity assessment process, is that their leadership team wasn't aligned on strategic priorities, right? Every leader had a little bit different sense of kind of what mattered. And so they had their part of the organization sort of pointed in a slightly different direction. And so as you can imagine, when you have two different departments that are trying to kind of head in slightly different directions, they're either bumping into each other or they're trying to pull away from each other. And neither of those is great for optimal performance. And so once we figured that out, then we helped them work through and get truly aligned, to figure out where they were out of alignment, get calibrated and pointed in the right direction. And once they did that at the top of the organization, most of the conflict that was there just kind of dissolved and disappeared. It was really just a simple breakdown in clarity at the top. There was another client that had something that was a little more difficult to address. Well, they had some performance and organizational issues that were going on that were causing the organization to get kind of stalled. They were having difficulty making some big decisions about the firm. It was a professional services firm, so there was a bunch of partners involved in this. And what they knew, but nobody was saying, that became very clear when we got into the process, was that they had two senior leaders, two partners that were creating pretty significant issues for them. They were being really disruptive. One was one of those that kind of consistently delivered on, sort of bringing business in and sort of that part of being a partner in a firm like that. But he left chaos in his wake everywhere. Like, nobody wanted to work with him. People went out of their way to avoid him. There was just a lot of noise around him. The other one was kind of a long tenured partner, had been there, for many years, was one of the early partners, I think, in this firm, and had kind of gotten to the point where he had stopped paying attention to how his behavior and his decisions was impacting other people, particularly people downstream in the organization. And again, this was creating problems. He was had become legendary for derailing leadership team meetings, right? Because he'd pick fights that people were like, why are we arguing about this? And so the thing that was interesting is that kind of everybody, when I got into the conversations and the process with this team, everybody, it wasn't a sort of secret. Everybody knew that this was going on, but they weren't addressing it. And so once we put that truth on the table in a way that they had to look at it and they couldn't ignore it, and I helped them understand the impact that this was having on their business, they took action. One of the leaders stepped away. The sort of more tenured leader decided he was going to kind of step back and move towards retirement. The other one, they had to let go. And the effect on the organization was immediate. Like, when those two decisions were made, or sort of as they were made, the whole leadership team of partners sort of exhaled. Right? They got to stop spending all of their time and their money kind of investments managing drama and sort of working around these two, and they could get focused on what actually mattered. And they saw, progress in the firm started to increase quickly. They were able to kind of tackle these big issues that they'd been avoiding, and they saw the returns and the results come pretty quickly, more quickly than they would have expected. But it was just because they had these huge obstacles in their way that they were all pretending weren't there. Once they saw them and were confronted with the impact, then they could take action. So that's what leadership clarity looks like in practice. Organizational alignment is where we partner with organizations to help them uncover where strategy and culture, or sort of how strategy and culture are being experienced. So we go out and gather real data from both leaders and employees across the organization to sort of expose where there's alignment and where there is disconnects and where there are gaps. And then we put the truth again on the table so that the leaders can see what's going on, right? They can be clear-eyed about what's happening and how the day-to-day experience might not be moving the organization in the direction that they want, so that then they can make some decisions. And so the process itself often involves an employee survey, or some kind of other, feedback gathering, focus groups, that kind of thing. And like with any employee survey or feedback project, the critical part of this step is that once we get to where we put the truth on the table, you have to take action, right? It's what you do there. So we partner with you once we have the data, we get the data, and then we partner with you on how to make sense of it, and then how to prioritize what to address and what to do next, so that you can, start closing those disconnects to reconnect strategy and culture to really propel the organization forward. And that work can end up looking like a lot of different things. In some cases, it's looked like redefining or more clearly defining values, or mapping values and strategies together. And other times it's defining behaviors, leadership behaviors or sort of values-based behaviors, so that people can align and connect to that. And other times it can be as tactical as dealing with work processes or policies that might be getting in the way of what the strategy is asking the organization to do. So that's what that body of work looks like. It's diagnosing and then addressing where strategy and culture are misaligned. And then the final piece of the puzzle is what we call performance enablement. And this is how we support and equip people managers within the organization. Because if you've been a people manager or you support people managers, if you're leading the organization, you know that managing people might be the most challenging job in the organization, especially those middle management jobs are really hard because the manager is, they kind of have the day-to-day work experience of employees in their hands, right? More than anyone else in the organization, your manager influences whether you feel supported and valued and equipped to succeed. The manager helps you understand how and if your work matters. And when managers are skilled and supported, performance improves, people are engaged. We know this, we've seen it. But when they aren't, they can unintentionally undermine the whole thing, right? Even inside of a clear, aligned culture, the manager is the bridge between the intention of leadership and the execution of people in the organization, right? They are this sort of vital linchpin component. And the problem is that most managers out there, at least that I've worked with or that I have seen and supported, they're doing the best they can, often with very limited training, and they're working with outdated tools and systems. They've never been taught, and it's never been modeled for them how to build the kind of relationships that bring out people's best work. And all too often, the systems that they're working within are actually making their job even harder instead of easier. And so what we do in this part of the process is we partner with clients to equip managers and leaders at every level of the organization with relationship-first leadership skills and the systems needed to support them. And at the heart of this is teaching managers how to have the conversations that really matter with people, because that's where it all begins. And so one of the practices that we teach is called the clarity check-in. And if you've followed my work for any period of time, you may have heard me talk about this. And we had a manager, there's a great example of sort of the power of these skills and tools, is we had a manager at a client organization that had been struggling with an employee for months. Right? The employee and the manager were both frustrated. The relationship had gotten to the point that they were ready to fire this person. They were ready to let the employee go. But fortunately, we'd recently trained them on the clarity check-in tool. And so this manager used the tool with this employee. It's a structure for a different kind of conversation that they had had in the past. It's one that focuses you on kind of really getting into what assumptions are being made and where there's a lack of clarity and misalignment, and sort of draws that out. And what they discovered in this process through this discussion was a game changer for them. The manager and the employee both had completely different understandings of what success looked like for this individual's role. They both had competing and conflicting assumptions that had been causing them to be in conflict for months. And once they actually got those assumptions out, right, they could put them out where each of them could see them and talk about them and recognize them, and they could address those and deal with them and get sort of aligned on what actually mattered, on what success actually looked like. The relationship started to repair almost immediately, and within weeks, the employee was back on track. One conversation, right? One conversation with the right structure saved a good employee that they were about to let go. And that's experience and performance that they didn't need to lose. It was a recruiting project that they didn't have to take on, retraining time and investment avoided, right? Because of one tool and one conversation. Probably saved that organization tens of thousands of dollars, if not more. And when you think about that, multiply that amount by, a bunch of tools that we teach, that we put in managers' hands, and then multiply that by the number of employees in your organization, and you can see where, both in terms of the improvement in performance, but also mitigating the risk of losing people you don't need to lose, or people that are underperforming unnecessarily. And you can see that this isn't about training, it's about financial results. It's about returns. Depending on the size of your organization, you could be talking about millions of dollars that you're leaving on the table because of ineffective performance enablement. So this is really about ensuring your people leaders at all levels have what they need to support people doing their best work. What I just went through is the connected performance system. Leadership clarity, organizational alignment, performance enablement. And this is the sort of structure and foundation of how we partner with our clients to do the work. So if your organization is ready to finally get at the heart of what's causing your performance or engagement issues and actually then do the work to fix them, let's talk, because I'm confident that we can help. So there's a link in the show notes if you'd like to get in touch, or if you want to just shoot me a message on LinkedIn, that will work too. We can get in touch there. I'd love to connect and see if we can help. So I hope that if you went with me on this journey, I hope this all makes sense. If any of it lacked clarity, or you would like to ask me some questions, or if you're curious about any of the parts of the system guides our work, but the system is the system. So you can use the system to guide your work internally as well. So I hope that not only was this informative and you have a clearer sense of what we do and what the Connected Performance Group does, but also that you have some ideas on maybe where you might want to take a deeper look in your organization. So thank you for being with me today. Next week, we'll be back to regular episodes, and I'll be back with another great interview for you to learn from and be inspired by. So until then, I'll see you next time.